At my graduation dinner, with champagne glasses raised and my name engraved on a law school acceptance plaque, my parents slid an envelope across the table and told me to sign over my entire inheritance to my sister, in front of everyone. Keaton Vale could hardly believe the moment had finally arrived. Years of late nights, endless textbooks, and countless sacrifices had led him to this day. Graduating at the very top of his class in Chicago, the excitement bubbled inside him as he got ready for what his parents called a special family dinner. Blair and Hollis Vale had been unusually insistent that tonight had to be perfect, picking the most expensive steakhouse in the city, and insisting on reservations in a private room. Keaton dressed carefully, straightening his tie and making sure every detail looked right, imagining the warm smiles and proud faces he would see. Marybeth, his older sister, arrived just as they sat down. She had left college years ago, and Keaton had always felt a strange distance between them. Tonight, though, she carried an air that was impossible to ignore. Her smile was sharp, her eyes glinting with something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't the happiness he expected. It was a kind of satisfaction that made Keaton uneasy. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself it was just her way of showing pride, or maybe relief that he had finally caught up to her achievements. As the waiter brought menus and the family started chatting, Keaton noticed the small details that felt out of place. His mother's nervous hands, the way his father cleared his throat more than usual, and Marybeth leaning back with a self-satisfied smirk. There was tension in the room, subtle but undeniable. Yet Keaton smiled and laughed, thinking perhaps he was reading too much into it. This was supposed to be a night of celebration, of recognition for everything he had worked for. But beneath the laughter and clinking glasses, a quiet unease lingered, a feeling that tonight might not be just about congratulations after all. Just as Keaton raised his glass to thank everyone for their support, Hollis cleared his throat, drawing the room's attention. The chatter faded, and a sudden weight settled over the table. With deliberate calm, his father reached into a leather folder and slid a set of papers across the polished surface. Keaton frowned, curious but not yet alarmed, thinking it might be some kind of congratulatory document or gift certificate. Blair's voice broke the silence. "Keaton, these papers are very important," she said, her tone almost rehearsed. "It's about the family, and sometimes sacrifices must be made." She smiled, but there was a strange tightness in her expression. Keaton looked down and realized the documents weren't ordinary. They were legal forms transferring his trust fund, recently released after his grandfather's passing, directly into Marybeth's name. His stomach dropped. Marybeth leaned forward, eyes wide in mock surprise. "Oh, I really do need this," she said softly, making sure everyone around the table could hear. Blair continued, insisting that it was for the good of the family, and that Marybeth had more pressing needs, because of some failed investments and debts she had accrued over the years. Their words hit Keaton like a punch. It wasn't just an ask, it was a demand. The air felt colder, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He tried to speak, to find the right words to question this sudden turn. But Blair and Hollis were already carefully framing it as a noble family decision, one that he was supposed to understand and accept without argument. Every glance from Marybeth was dripping with expectation, her smile daring him to resist. Keaton realized in that instant that this was no longer a celebration. This was a carefully orchestrated moment designed to test his limits, his loyalty, and his sense of what was fair. Keaton felt every eye in the room on him, and the weight of their stares was suffocating. His extended family had gathered around the long, polished table, and it was clear now that the dinner wasn't just about his graduation. Blair and Hollis had carefully chosen this audience, knowing that relatives could add pressure and make refusal almost impossible. Every glance, every whispered comment seemed calculated to make him feel guilty. Marybeth's performance began immediately. Tears welled in her eyes, and she pressed a hand to her chest as if the world were crumbling around her. "I just don't know how I'll manage without this," she said, her voice trembling, perfectly timed for maximum effect. Keaton could see some relatives leaning forward, clearly sympathetic, nodding as if her distress were real. An aunt murmured softly but loudly enough for him to hear, "Sometimes family loyalty means making sacrifices for each other." That single sentence hit harder than any words his parents had said. The room was silent except for the faint clinking of cutlery and the low hum of tension. Every look felt like an accusation, every slight frown a judgment on him. Keaton's stomach churned. He realized the truth. This dinner was not about celebrating his achievement. It was an ambush. Everything from the choice of restaurant to the presence of relatives, even Mary Beth's tears, had been orchestrated to corner him, to force him into handing over what was rightfully his. For a moment, he felt a flicker of panic, the kind that comes when you are trapped and expected to comply. But beneath it, a slow, burning clarity grew. They wanted control, to manipulate him with guilt and shame. Keaton understood that his next move would define not just the rest of the evening, but the boundaries of his life and his family. He had to be careful, but he also had to be firm. Keaton sat back in his chair, trying to steady his racing heart as the weight of the room pressed down on him. Then a memory flashed. His grandfather, Alastair Vale, sitting in his study years ago, the warm light from the desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Keaton had been just a teenager then, nervous about grades and the future. Alastair had looked at him with steady eyes and said, "Keaton, remember why this family trust exists. It's not about pity or rescuing anyone. It's meant to reward those who work, who stay disciplined, who keep their focus." He could hear his grandfather's voice clearly, firm but kind. Never let guilt or pressure steal what you've earned. Some people will try to make you feel responsible for what isn't yours to give. Your choices are yours, and your hard work deserves protection. At the time, Keaton had nodded, thinking it was advice for later, abstract guidance for adulthood. Now, sitting at the dinner table, those words came back sharper than ever. He realized that everything happening right now, the tears, the whispers, the pressure, was exactly the kind of manipulation his grandfather had warned him about. Mary Beth's sobs, his parents' rehearsed speeches about family sacrifice, even the aunt's murmured reminders of loyalty, were all designed to trigger guilt. Keaton felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't about helping anyone. It wasn't about family. It was about control, about forcing him to surrender what he had earned through years of hard work, determination, and sacrifice. Alastair's voice echoed in his mind again. "Don't let guilt steal what you earned." The words gave him strength. He understood now that this moment was a test, not just of his patience but of his sense of self-worth. He could see clearly what needed to be done, and for the first time since the envelope appeared, he felt calm. His inheritance, the reward for years of dedication, was his to protect. No one could take it without his consent. Keaton picked up the papers slowly, his hands steady despite the tension in the room. He studied them for a moment, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him, and then made a decision. Without a word, he folded the documents neatly and pushed them back toward his father. No, the single word left his lips calmly, but it hit harder than anything else could. The room froze. Forks hovered in midair, glasses paused halfway to mouths, and even the waiter seemed to hesitate, unsure if he should step in. Silence swallowed the table, heavy and suffocating. Hollis Vale's face darkened immediately. "Selfish," his father spat, leaning forward. "Do you have any idea what this family has done for you? How ungrateful you are." Blair's eyes glistened with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Abandoning your family for money," she said sharply. Her voice trembled, but the accusation was clear. "I can't believe you'd do this in front of everyone. This is your sister, Keaton." Mary Beth's expression twisted, half in shock, half in rage. Her theatrical tears turned to real frustration, and she slammed her napkin on the table. "Fine," she shouted. "I don't need this from you anyway." Without waiting for a response, she stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The sound echoed like a drumbeat of finality, leaving only stunned relatives behind. Keaton remained seated, his hands folded on the table, breathing evenly. The anger, the whispers, the judging eyes, all of it surrounded him, but he refused to waver. He knew he had done the right thing, even if everyone else saw it as betrayal. For the first time that night, he felt in control. He had drawn a line and nothing, no guilt, no pressure, no manipulation, would make him cross it. This was his choice, and he would stand by it. Keaton picked up the papers slowly, his hands steady despite the tension in the room. He studied them for a moment, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him. and then made a decision. Without a word, he folded the documents neatly and pushed them back toward his father. No, the single word left his lips calmly, but it hit harder than anything else could. The room froze. Forks hovered in midair, glasses paused halfway to mouths, and even the waiter seemed to hesitate, unsure if he should step in. Silence swallowed the table, heavy and suffocating. Hollis Vale's face darkened immediately. Selfish, his father spat, leaning forward. Do you have any idea what this family has done for you? How ungrateful you are. Blair's eyes glistened with a mix of anger and disbelief. Abandoning your family for money, she said sharply. Her voice trembled, but the accusation was clear. I can't believe you'd do this in front of everyone. This is your sister, Keaton. Mary Beth's expression twisted, half in shock, half in rage. Her theatrical tears turned to real frustration, and she slammed her napkin on the table. Fine, she shouted. I don't need this from you anyway. Without waiting for a response, she stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The sound echoed like a drumbeat of finality, leaving only stunned relatives behind. Keaton remained seated, his hands folded on the table, breathing evenly. The anger, the whispers, the judging eyes, all of it surrounded him, but he refused to waver. He knew he had done the right thing, even if everyone else saw it as betrayal. For the first time that night, he felt in control. He had drawn a line and nothing, no guilt, no pressure, no manipulation, would make him cross it. This was his choice, and he would stand by it. Keaton picked up the papers slowly, his hands steady despite the tension in the room. He studied them for a moment, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him, and then made a decision. Without a word, he folded the documents neatly and pushed them back toward his father. No, the single word left his lips calmly, but it hit harder than anything else could. The room froze. Forks hovered in midair, glasses paused halfway to mouths, and even the waiter seemed to hesitate, unsure if he should step in. Silence swallowed the table, heavy and suffocating. Hollis Vale's face darkened immediately. Selfish, his father spat, leaning forward. Do you have any idea what this family has done for you? How ungrateful you are. Blair's eyes glistened with a mix of anger and disbelief. Abandoning your family for money, she said sharply. Her voice trembled, but the accusation was clear. I can't believe you'd do this in front of everyone. This is your sister, Keaton. Mary Beth's expression twisted, half in shock, half in rage. Her theatrical tears turned to real frustration, and she slammed her napkin on the table. Fine, she shouted. I don't need this from you anyway. Without waiting for a response, she stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. The sound echoed like a drumbeat of finality, leaving only stunned relatives behind. Keaton remained seated, his hands folded on the table, breathing evenly. The anger, the whispers, the judging eyes, all of it surrounded him, but he refused to waver. He knew he had done the right thing, even if everyone else saw it as betrayal. For the first time that night, he felt in control. He had drawn a line and nothing, no guilt, no pressure, no manipulation, would make him cross it. This was his choice, and he would stand by it. Within days of the graduation dinner, Keaton felt the world around him shift. Phone calls from his parents became rare, their messages curt and cold. Blair and Hollis no longer invited him to family gatherings, and when he tried reaching out, their responses were distant, polite but empty. Word seemed to spread through relatives and neighbors, painting him as someone who chose money over family. Whispers followed him at school, and even casual family members treated him differently, as if he had committed some unforgivable crime. Holidays, which had once been warm and lively, now carried a strange heaviness. Invitations stopped arriving, or when they did, they were so awkwardly formal that Keaton quickly realized his presence was not genuinely wanted. Dinner conversations turned tense, and even those willing to see him were guarded, unsure how to navigate the family drama. Mary Beth, in particular, continued to flaunt her supposed moral victory, talking openly about sacrifices and loyalty, as if his refusal had permanently stained him in the eyes of everyone. Despite the emotional isolation, Keaton remained steady. He refused to let their anger and manipulation dictate his life. The trust fund his grandfather had left him, the very thing they tried to wrest from him, stayed untouched. He used it carefully, investing in his future rather than letting anger guide his choices. Every decision was deliberate. Textbooks, tuition, rent, and living expenses for law school, all handled wisely, ensuring he could continue his education without relying on anyone who had betrayed him. Keaton found a strange strength in this solitude. Without constant family pressure, he could focus entirely on his goals. The more his parents and sister tried to control the narrative, the more he realized that his life and his achievements were his alone. Their attempts to punish him only confirmed that standing firm had been the right choice. In the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by books and notes, he felt a clarity he hadn't experienced before. He was building his future on his own terms, and nothing could take that away. A few weeks after the graduation fallout, Keaton began digging quietly into what had really happened with Marybeth's finances. Bills, statements, and conversations with a few trusted family contacts slowly revealed a shocking truth. Her debt wasn't just carelessness or bad luck. It had been built on risky business partnerships, some tied directly to Hollis's side ventures. Loans had been taken, agreements signed, and in many cases, his father had co-signed without Keaton's knowledge. The realization hit hard. The inheritance his parents had tried to wrest from him wasn't about helping Marybeth survive. It was about covering up Hollis's mistakes, about saving appearances. Blair's insistence and Marybeth's tears suddenly made sense. They weren't worried about Marybeth's well-being. They were worried about how it looked to creditors, neighbors, and the extended family. The so-called family sacrifice had been a cover story, carefully designed to guilt him into protecting Hollis's reputation. Keaton felt a mix of anger and clarity. All along, he had assumed their pressure was about tradition or loyalty. Now he saw it for what it was: manipulation. His parents had tried to use guilt as a tool to hide their failures, and Marybeth had played her part perfectly, acting helpless while secretly benefiting from the scheme. This discovery didn't make the past moments hurt any less, but it strengthened his resolve. Every tear, every whisper about loyalty, every shout about selfishness had been part of a larger plan to control him. Keaton understood that standing firm wasn't just a matter of protecting money. It was about refusing to be used as a pawn in their desperate attempts to fix their own messes. The more he uncovered, the more determined he became to let them face the consequences of their choices. While he focused on building a life based on his own effort and integrity, Keaton decided that loud arguments and public confrontations would only play into his parents' hands. Instead of trying to prove himself or explain his side, he chose silence. He returned calls politely when necessary, but mostly kept his distance, avoiding family gatherings and small talk that could give them ammunition. By stepping back, he gave himself space to think clearly and plan carefully. With the inheritance intact, Keaton focused on securing his future. He invested a portion of the money conservatively, avoiding flashy purchases or risky ventures. Every move was deliberate, aimed at long-term stability rather than instant gratification. Meanwhile, he threw himself into law school work, seeking internships that would build both experience and valuable connections for later in his career. He knew that success would give him a kind of leverage his parents could never manipulate. He also observed his family quietly from afar, noting patterns and weaknesses without acting on them immediately. He learned which relatives were truly loyal, and which ones would follow his parents' lead, which helped him understand how carefully he needed to move in the future. Every decision, every connection, was part of a larger strategy to ensure that if the time ever came, he could respond with strength rather than emotion. Despite the isolation, Keaton found a growing sense of calm. He wasn't reacting to guilt or pressure anymore. He was building something solid for himself. His parents' attempts to control him no longer had power. By staying quiet and focusing on his goals, he gained clarity, stability, and influence. In the silence, he was preparing the ultimate leverage, not through confrontation or revenge yet, but by quietly creating a life where he held the advantage, ready for the moment when he could let consequences catch up to those who tried to manipulate him. Blair and Hollis finally sat across from Keaton, the desperation in their eyes impossible to miss. Their usual confidence was gone, replaced with cautious, measured words. "Keaton," Hollis began, voice low. "We need a temporary loan. Just enough to stabilize things until we get back on our feet." Keaton listened without interrupting. He didn't raise his voice or show any anger. Instead, he nodded slowly, considering their request carefully. In that moment, he realized that the situation had shifted completely. They were no longer in control. For once, they were asking for help from the very person they had tried to manipulate and humiliate a year ago. After a pause, Keaton pulled out a notebook and began drafting a formal agreement. Every term was precise: strict repayment deadlines, clear interest rates, and collateral that included personal property and business assets. He treated the situation like any professional client, leaving no room for emotion or leniency. Blair and Hollis exchanged worried glances, realizing this was not a casual favor but a business transaction, one that held them fully accountable. They studied the papers carefully, their faces tightening as they read each clause. Pride, which had once driven them to manipulate him publicly, now became their obstacle. Neither Blair nor Hollis could bring themselves to accept such conditions from their own son. The idea of signing a formal contract, putting themselves on equal footing with him, was unbearable. After a long silence, Blair shook her head, and Hollis muttered something about impossible terms. They left without an agreement, their desperate plea unanswered. Keaton didn't feel satisfaction or gloating. He felt calm and certain. For the first time, the power balance was clear. He had protected his inheritance, and now, by setting clear boundaries and expectations, he had shown them that help came only on his terms, and that he would never be manipulated again. Months passed, and the consequences of Blair and Hollis's decisions became impossible to ignore. Without access to Keaton's inheritance, their financial problems worsened. The family home, once a symbol of their success, was put on the market and quickly sold to cover debts. Marybeth, who had relied on the illusion of wealth, was forced to leave her apartment and move into a small, modest rental. The lifestyle she had flaunted, designer clothes, dinners out, and luxury items, disappeared almost overnight. Relatives who had once whispered about loyalty and pressured Keaton to give in now stayed silent. There were no more judgments, no more subtle accusations. The very people who had tried to manipulate him recognized, perhaps without saying it, that the truth of his refusal had been justified. Keaton, meanwhile, remained focused on his own life. He graduated from law school debt-free, thanks to the careful planning and investments he had made with his inheritance. The months of dedication and study paid off when he landed a position at a prestigious law firm, a job that promised stability, respect, and a clear path forward. With his first real earnings, he purchased a modern condo of his own, a place where he could live independently, free from family pressure and manipulation. In this quiet success, Keaton felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Karma, in its own way, had arrived. The struggles and pride of his parents and sister, once used to control and intimidate him, had now become their burden. Keaton didn't need to gloat or seek revenge actively. The natural consequences of their choices had shifted the balance. As he settled into his new home and his professional life began to flourish, he understood that patience, integrity, and standing firm had brought him far more than anger or retaliation ever could. Keaton stood quietly by his grandfather's grave, the cold March wind brushing against his face. The stone was simple, but it carried the weight of years of wisdom, guidance, and the lessons his grandfather had left him. As he traced the engraved letters with his fingers, memories of Alistair Vale's voice came rushing back, reminding him of discipline, focus, and the importance of protecting what he had earned. He thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The graduation dinner, the pressure from his parents, Marybeth's tears, and the quiet unraveling of their lives. In that stillness, Keaton realized that what he had done wasn't about revenge in the cruel sense. He hadn't schemed to hurt them or take satisfaction in their failures. His actions had been deliberate, calm, and just. He had said no when they tried to take what was rightfully his. That refusal in itself had been the most powerful form of justice. Looking at the headstone, Keaton understood the true meaning of boundaries. Loyalty without limits becomes exploitation. Trying to please everyone or surrender what you've earned to satisfy others' needs is not sacrifice. It's a trap. His grandfather had warned him about this, and now, seeing the results of his steadfastness, the lesson was clear. Keaton smiled faintly, feeling a sense of peace. The world had balanced itself without his interference. Karma had quietly done its work, proving that time and patience often accomplish more than anger or retaliation. He straightened, feeling lighter, knowing that saying no had been an act of self-respect, not betrayal. For the first time in a long while he felt free, confident, and certain that he had honored both his grandfather's wisdom and his own integrity. In that quiet moment, Keaton understood that true strength often comes from standing firm, letting consequences unfold naturally, and trusting that justice doesn't always need an audience.
Some stories don't end, they follow you. If this one stayed in your mind, you know what to do.